Great Lakes Now is sponsored by the Fred A. and Barbara M. Erb Family Foundation, nurturing environmentally healthy and culturally vibrant communities in metropolitan Detroit, and supporting initiatives to restore the Great Lakes Basin. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. The EPA leads a task force of 15 federal agencies and departments to implement the President's Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. And by the International Joint Commission, assessing progress, providing advice, and engaging the public under the U.S.-Canada Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement.
Good afternoon, and thanks so much for joining us for Public Television's coverage of Great Lakes Week. I'm Christy McDonald. We are coming to you live from Detroit on the campus of Wayne State University, one of two locations for the conferences all of this week. And this is a first on a few levels. For the first time, government agencies, state, and environmental groups supporting the restoration of the Great Lakes from all around the basin are all meeting at the same time so they can share their ideas, things that have worked, maybe things that haven't worked, and compare agendas. The headlining groups here, the IJC, which is the International Joint Commission, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the Great Lakes Commission, and Healing Our Waters Great Lakes. It is also a first for Detroit Public TV. It's the first time that we have extensively covered these conferences, so we're going to take you inside the sessions starting today through Friday. And you'll also be able to get in on the conversation, hear the science, a little debate. At night, we're going to have primetime shows for you, making sure you get the headlines from the day. We want to remind you that you can interact with us on social media as well. You can go to our Facebook page at Great Lakes Now, and you can also follow us on Twitter at Great Lakes Now as well. So if you want to get in a little on the conversation, we'd love to hear from you. This afternoon, we're going to talk a little bit about several things with the conferences. So I have a couple of guests joining me right now. Gary Wilson, he's a commentator from the Great Lakes Echo. He's sitting over here on my left. And then closer to me right now is Nick Chirac. He's the executive director of Great Lakes Environmental Law Center here at Wayne State University. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. So Nick, let me start with you. How have you found things so far with the conference, and what are you looking forward to hearing in the next couple of days?
Well, it is very exciting to have all of the groups here, all the players in the same room, and we're getting excellent updates from not only the non-governmental organizations or environmental groups that are here, but also US EPA and Environment Canada about all of the work that's going on around the Great Lakes.
And Gary, so far, what have you been able to kind of sniff out as the top issues?
Well, I think there's a lot of emphasis being placed and actually re-emphasis on these areas of concern, these toxic hotspots that are all around the lake. And some early word leaking out is that the EPA is going to kind of reinforce their mission to start cleaning up some of these areas.
Nick, let me kind of toss it over to you, where we talk a lot about there has to be regulation to make sure that the states in the Great Lake Basin are complying with some of the same rules to make sure that we can clean up the Great Lakes. What do you see as the biggest hurdle in all of that, coming from a law perspective?
Well, regulation is very important, but regulations are meaningless if they're not enforced. And what we oftentimes see is that with the way that our political system works, oftentimes industry groups have an outsized voice in these types of proceedings. So it's important for citizens, for the community to really hold our regulators, so EPA, or in the state of Michigan, our Department of Environmental Quality, kind of hold their feet to the fire and make sure that they're enforcing the regulations we have on the books so that we don't have the kind of backsliding that we oftentimes see. And then beyond that, it's finding gaps or holes where there's improvement could be possible, and that's where we need to look at new legislation, new laws.
And looking at some of the issues surrounding the Great Lakes right now, what have you been spending most of your time on?
Invasive species are definitely a big issue. Everyone's heard about the Asian carp at this point, and but we also have other threats. Things like our changing land use patterns around the Great Lakes, where we're seeing more types of runoff from agriculture, but also from places that used to be forests or fields are now subdivisions. And so we have to deal with that kind of runoff into the Great Lakes. That's a big issue. And one other thing to flag, which hasn't really been brought up much yet, are chemicals of emerging concern. Things like pharmaceutical products, pesticides that are making their way into our Great Lakes and into our drinking water.
I want to back up and talk a little bit about invasive species, and I know that, Gary, that you've written about this extensively, and coming from Chicago and talking about Asian carp. Where are we right now with the battle, I guess you could say?
Well, the battle continues, and this first blew up not quite 2 years ago, And it's one of the stories that has really, maintained traction. Sometimes issues that come up related to the Great Lakes are like sunspots. They're high intensity and then they leave. This has stayed in the news and stayed in the popular media, especially in Chicago. The states, led by Michigan, Attorney General Bill Schuette. Okay, he's leading the charge in the lawsuit against the Army Corps of Engineers in Chicago's Water District. They haven't had a victory yet to date in court, but they sort of had a minor victory in the appeals process, where I think the appeals court really kind of gave them some ammunition to go to the next level. So it's ongoing, and they don't appear to be backing off.
What do you think, Nick? I mean, this is where we're waging the battle in the water, but now this is really taking a pattern through the courts.
Right, and the thing that's important to note is that in our environmental law kind of toolbox of regulations that we have, there isn't a great way to get at invasive species that are just making their way through a water body. The Clean Water Act deals with discharges of pollution from a pipe. So if you had an invasive species being discharged off of a ship or out of a pipe, well, then we can get at it through the Clean Water Act. But here, what's been really interesting is watching Michigan and the other states look at common law claims. So common law, this is sort of the old traditions that were passed on from Roman law to English law into our system here in the United States. And what Michigan has argued is that Asian carp coming into the Great Lakes poses a threat of a public nuisance. And so that public nuisance, the way to stop it is to keep the carp from coming into Lake Michigan. That's what they've been arguing. The difficulty is sort of weighing that threat of Asian carp being established versus commerce and goods moving up and down the Chicago lock system.
Because people complain, we don't want to get in the way of making sure that people are able to make money and conduct business the way they need to do it.
I would add, separate from the law, when you hear the discourse between people in Illinois and Chicago and Indiana and people in Michigan and Wisconsin and other Great Lakes states, it's like one group is speaking English and the other group is speaking Russian. It's kind of like, what's the big deal? We've got, these locks and some carp. What's the point? And clearly Michigan and the other states don't see it that way. That's why we're in court.
What I also find interesting is when you look at some of the laws that are on the books right now, you would think that if everyone's coming from the same place of we want to protect the Great Lakes, we want to make sure that they maintain the great resource that they are right now, that the laws aren't the same across the board, that the states sometimes have different regulations. And we were just talking about a news story that came out from the Great Lakes Commission that they're renewing their call for federal ballast discharge standards. And for people at home who might be saying, what are federal ballast discharge? And explain to me the ballast water and the discharge coming from the boats and bringing in invasive species and why it's not the same across the board.
Right. So ships, going back to the beginning of our maritime history, use ballast, weight, to stabilize the ships as they're traveling in the water. So modern vessels, what they do is they draw in water to stabilize their hold when they don't have cargo in it. So what you'll see is a ship taking on water, could be in Eastern Europe, then traveling across the Atlantic Ocean and making its way into the Great Lakes through the St. Lawrence Seaway. Then they would discharge that water when they start to bring on cargo to keep their ship relatively stable. And within that ballast water, any sort of organisms, invasive species, all sorts of stuff can be carried into the Great Lakes region. So we've had a series of states take a step at getting at the ballast water issue through passing state legislation. The problem is we have 8 states in the Great Lakes, we have 2 Canadian provinces, and if they all pass separate laws, it's very difficult not only for enforcement, but also for the shipping industry to comply with all those different regulations.
So to me, Gary, it would seem to make sense that it all seems to make sense that we're all after the same thing here. How come we don't have a federal law?
Boy, that's a good question. And I would add to Nick's comment that the states a few years ago started taking action because the federal government didn't. Everybody agrees that there should be a uniform standard. Environmental groups, the shipping groups, everybody. But the federal government just hasn't taken the action, and the states felt compelled to move, and they did.
I want to touch a little bit about, we talk about invasive species. Another thing that I think is a hot button issue for people when they hear about the Great Lakes, they think about fish and they think about mercury. What is the latest on protecting the waterways and the fish from that? And from a legal perspective, Nick, what are you working on?
Well, Administrator Lisa P. Jackson, the EPA administrator, spoke. She addressed the conference today, and she reiterated her call for stricter mercury emissions limits from coal-fired power plants. Folks may not realize we get the vast majority of our electricity, not only in Michigan, but in the Great Lakes region, from coal plants. And when we burn coal, one of the emissions is mercury. It makes its way into the atmosphere, falls down as rain into our lakes and rivers as mercury, and then it accumulates in aquatic organisms, then into fish populations. So we kind of look at this from a couple levels, but the main one is that we need to transition away from building new coal plants as a way to power our homes and our businesses moving forward. We need to look at other sources of energy that are less toxic. The other thing is making sure that while we have some regulations right now, we do need stricter pollution controls on smokestacks that are already existing to make sure that we continue to ratchet down those levels of mercury.
Now we're getting into the politics of it all, though, Gary.
Yet in Michigan, Governor Snyder, his administration anyway, just reversed the Granholm administration and issued a new permit for a coal-fired power plant. So I guess the question is, how do we ever get the mercury out of the water if we're going to keep issuing permits for coal-fired power plants? And I know there's litigation that was just filed by two groups.
Right. Sierra Club and NRDC have sued the state of Michigan over this permit for this Wolverine power plant. There's also a couple other proposals floating out there, one in Holland, Michigan. And so the question is whether or not the state is serious about transitioning to a clean energy economy, or whether we're going to continue to use technologies that really date back a couple centuries. And those technologies are dirty. And another important thing to note is it's very expensive to build these types of facilities. We're talking billions of dollars, and that cost gets passed on to ratepayers, and that's money that could be used for all sorts of other environmental cleanup, pollution controls, that type of thing.
And it would seem to me that anything that's going to cost more in the short term, people all of a sudden balk very quickly, and is that cost is going to be passed along to me. I don't want to pay more right now. It would also seem that the wheel turns very, very slowly when it comes to those new energies and to selling that publicly, that people are actually going to buy that.
Right, and an important thing to note, though, is we don't have to pay for wind. We don't have to pay for sunlight. So if we can harness those sources of power, that's going to ultimately save many, many billions of dollars over the course of generations. You look at the cost of coal, it continues to increase. So we're paying more. In Michigan, we don't have coal deposits. So we're importing all the coal, we're paying it to come from somewhere else. And then we're also dealing with the legacy of those pollutants, again, for generations. So it is time to make that transition. It's difficult. Folks are always a little concerned when we talk about new technologies. But again, wind is free, sunlight's free, and we have to transition to those sources.
Nick, is this the classic old jobs versus the environment? If we build this plant, we're going to hire so many people to do it. And I thought we would kind of moved away from that model, but I don't think we have.
Locally, when you look at a proposal for a large facility to come in and you're talking hundreds of jobs, that's always a very difficult argument to refute just on environmental grounds. So what's been a big transition in the environmental community is to say, well, wait a minute, what about all the jobs that are created by folks building wind turbines? We have this huge manufacturing base here in the Midwest. We've got skilled trades that are out of work. How about putting those folks to work on building wind turbines or large solar installations? And so you now see studies where there's so many economic benefits to transitioning to clean energy, and a lot of those jobs for building a coal plant, they're temporary construction jobs. Right. Once the plant comes up and it's operating, it's a lot fewer people working. So with renewable energy, you have to always continue to maintain the facilities, maintain the wind turbines, so you're going to have jobs for a longer term.
I mean, and I've actually visited a couple of the wind farms up in the Thumb area and taken a look at that. But when it seemed like people started talking about, why don't we start doing some offshore and putting those wind turbines in the water, it got an awful lot of opposition to that.
Sure. The Great Lakes are held in what's called the public trust, right? Our legislatures are charged with keeping the Great Lakes, protecting them for future generations, and the public owns the bottomlands of the Great Lakes. So to just say, okay, the state of Michigan, for instance, is going to permit someone to go out and put a wind turbine out in the Great Lakes, it raises a whole host of issues which we're not ready to address yet.
And we're not going to do it today because we'd be here 4 more days from now. But thanks, Nick Schrock. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank
also,
you.
as always, Gary Wilson, commentator for the Great Lakes Echo. We are going to continue our live coverage now of Great Lakes Now, right here on public television. We'll take you back live into the joint session.
I'm going to start with each report briefly, as I indicated. The reports are available outside as well at the table if you want to go through the details, and available on the website. The first one is the Nearshore Framework, the work group report. The Nearshore Framework is basically like the umbrella for all the work because of the impact of all the activities, the urban agriculture activities on the nearshore. And the purpose of this work is to assess the application of adaptive management in nearshore context, summarize recent nearshore related science activities, and identify potential gaps and suggest ways to conduct a detailed gap analysis. And the other thing also is the issue of the current research and assessment of conditions, diagnose of problems, prioritize and implement actions to resolve identified problems, including restoration and protection programs. Monitoring of ecosystem, response to restoration and protection programs. Evaluate and interpret monitoring results, and as necessary, adjust current actions, develop new actions, and revise schedules for implementation and reporting. The findings for the nearshore framework, the science activities, which include a number of new and ongoing programs that are being carried out in Canada and the United States. In the United States, the GLRI, the U.S. National Park Service and Lakes Michigan Monitoring Coordination Council, a nearshore monitoring work group, and in Canada, an ongoing monitoring work being carried by Environment Canada and the Ontario Ministry of Environment. And also identifying the gaps, the work that should continue, and more work is encouraged in the following areas: the urban runoff, groundwater, algal toxins, sewage discharge, drinking water intakes, source of contamination, wetlands and habitats, coastal engineering indicators, and airborne contaminants. The summary of the next steps is we will seek public input on nearshore problems, work with science organizations to identify potential nearshore issues, compare results of public and science consultations to identify gaps, conduct a comprehensive nearshore assessment. Framework should be built with adaptive management, identifying suitable types of programs, processes, and projects. Experience from outside the Great Lakes Basin should be analyzed, and investigate feasibility of more integration, collaboration, and coordination at all levels of government. The other work group, which is highly related also to the nearshore, is the harmful nuisance algae, and the report of the work group, as indicated. First, we need to look at what the Commission has charged the group to do, is to fill scientific gaps in assessment of conditions and diagnosis of problems, especially better understanding of urban sources of nutrients and better understanding of water quantity, water quality interactions. Prioritization of implementation actions was to focus on the no regrets management actions identified in the 2007-2009 Eutrophication Work Group report. The scientific component is refine understanding of the causal structure of the problem, check the consistency of the consensus causal understanding with literature, also determine the weight of evidence supporting the consensus causal structure, and for the management component is evaluate management strategies with respect to scientific weight of evidence. Analysis of implementation of management strategies also to be included. The communication component is to include and focus groups sessions with shoreline residents to determine casual understanding and willingness to support management strategies, and to develop a strategy for public dissemination of findings and recommendations. Again, for the scientific findings, The group identified there's a lack of evidentiary support for the role of drusenins of increased phosphorus loading and causing excessive growth of Cladophora, and evidentiary support for the effect of nutrient loading on harmful algae bloom varies by location. Overall importance of climate change in comparison to the effects of urbanization, agriculture, and drusenins on the nuisance and harmful algae is unknown. Report findings are not a summary of the current state of knowledge of the causes of nuisance algae problems. The summer workshop participants' opinion is available in the group's work group as well. Regarding the findings, the management issues, we found weak evidentiary support for the no regrets policies, with little evidence for effectiveness of strategies to reduce phosphorus loading, and weak weight of evidence for the casual structure, and weak evidence about the effectiveness and scales of implementation limit priority ranking. And justification for no regrets management activities rests on best management practices for sustainable agriculture. And on communication, use of community-based social marketing CBSM as a tool to develop strategies for changing environmentally harmful residential behaviors that contribute to eutrophication. The other work group was the chemicals of emerging concern. The 2007-2009, that's when this group started working as the priority at that time. And in 2007, the Chemicals of Emerging Concern Work Group was charged with reviewing the science and policy aspects of identification, impact, and management of the CECs in the Great Lakes. The work group found that the wastewater treatment plants discharges are a significant source of CEC to the Great Lakes, and that there is a need to assess the effectiveness of existing treatments technologies for their removal. Also, the work group also found that there was a need to assess impacts of CEC on human and ecological health. These findings helped to develop the basis for the activities carried out in the 2009-2011 priority cycle. In the 2009-2011 priority cycle, the work group was charged by the Commission to, 1, assess the performance of wastewater treatment plants in the Great Lakes Basin for the removal of chemicals of emerging concern. 2, human and ecological from exposure to chemicals of emerging. The work group developed a work plan that encompassed the details for the removal of CEC. Facts, literature review of the effects on organisms and humans, literature draft ecological effect strategy for assessing exposure to and effects of toxic substances in the Great Lakes. The findings and recommendations of the group are based on the results of the above activities. The other work group is on the beaches, recreational. The 2009-2011 work group report highlighted the following two key issues: the relationship between fecal indicator bacteria and public health, and management actions that improve beach quality, with special emphasis on controlling excess gull populations. These issues form the basis of the activities carried out in the 2009-2011 priority cycle work group. The purpose of the objectives of the work group in that cycle was identified here. The purpose is to identify problems associated with current indicators of recreational water quality, locate, compile, and review existing data on the relationship between human health and the presence of fecal indicator bacteria from birds, other wildlife, and livestock at Great Lakes beaches. Review and document beach improvement activities, identify priorities for research and implementation actions, and develop relevant recommendations for the parties' consideration. The work group activities during 2009-2011 included beach expert workshop, development of 6 white papers on selected issue topics, and second-order science on knowledge about avian effects on swimmers. Also, based on the findings of an expert consultation, the 6 white papers, and 3 second-order science analyses, the work group produced the priority cycle report. This report includes 6 recommendations and discussion on the following key topics: human health risk, recreational water exposure, contaminant sources, beach management practices, adequacy of microbiological monitoring, and waterfowl. And now we're coming to the other work group, which is the Binational Aquatic Invasive Species Rapid Response. This, of course, attracts attention for media and for the public, because something I think people can see it more visibly than chemicals of emerging concern, and the media can show fish, they can't show chemical. So I think it generates a lot of attention and interest. Over the past 2 years, the work group on binational AIS rapid response conducted research on several topics related to rapid response to build on the policy framework and to serve as both a foundation for further planning efforts. The activities of work group included the assessment of the current conditions. In December 2009, there was the Asian Carp response, the risk assessment and monitoring, chemical response tools, which include science and policy gaps, research monitoring, and coordination needs. The primary recommendation for the International Joint Commission to transmit to the governments of Canada and the United States is to develop and implement a formal binational Great Lakes AIS rapid response plan in cooperation with AIS management agencies to harmonize response actions and to promote mutual cooperation among US and Canadian Great Lakes. And the rapid response plan will aid the lead agency by identifying other jurisdictions impacted by particular incidents and agencies that can provide assistance. It ensures that all parties involved have sufficient technical expertise and resources, as well as the appropriate legislative and regulatory authority. The next steps is have information sharing to encourage on-the-ground actions for enhanced early detection and rapid response, and to develop a pilot binational AIS rapid response plan, and that's under the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative funded activity. The Binational Aquatic Invasive Species Rapid Response Work Group will work with its partners to share information from this report and in the work group's background reports with AIS program managers at all levels of government. The findings of these reports can be used to influence current funding sources so that they are in alignment with and fill the needs and gap identified in this report. The last work group, which has also generates interest for the public, the risk and benefit of Great Lakes fish consumption. And despite decades of progress, legacy contaminants such as PCBs and dioxins, we still significant issue in certain fish on the Great Lakes. And the presentations in the morning by John Sobrowski and others showed these some of the data that we still have an issue to consider. And during the 2009-2011 priority cycle, the work group sought to compile available information to assist in comparing the risks and benefits of consuming Great Lakes fish, as well as working with partners such as Health Canada, Ontario Ministry of Environment, and researchers at various universities to fill existing data gaps. The issue of the risk and benefits for the Great Lakes fish consumption, it focuses on the issue, the interest in the impact of the omega-3 fatty acids required for many critical health functions. And the work group found only 3 published reports on the content of the omega-3 fatty acids in fish from the Great Lakes. Additional data on omega-3 fatty acids levels in the Great Lakes fish will be submitted for publication. Due to this data gap, Health Canada's Ontario Region Food Laboratory, on behalf of the work group, analyzed lake trout from 5 Great Lakes and whitefish from Lake Superior, Huron, and Erie. In general, lake trout were found to contain significantly higher concentrations of omega-3 fatty acids than whitefish. And there is currently no accepted method to compare net risks to net benefits of the consuming fish from the Great Lakes. The few risk-benefits assessments for fish consumption attempted had focused on the methyl mercury and omega-3 fatty acids in relation to cardiovascular disease or neurobehavioral outcomes. And other risks related to PCBs, dioxins, furans, and persistent pesticides are especially critical to evaluate for Great Lakes fish consumers. Concentrations of these chemicals are in general higher in Great Lakes fish than in commercial fish, as reflected by higher contaminant body burdens in Great Lakes fish consumers than commercial fish consumers. The studies of Great Lake fish consumers that include current measures of omega-3 fatty acids, chemical contaminants, and health endpoints are lacking. In the absence of such studies, the most pressing need is for data on the omega-3 fatty acid content in various fish species in the 5 Great Lakes. That gives a very quick summary because we're pressed for time. And before I get notification that I'm running out of time, I will forward the mic to Chair Lana Pollack.
Good afternoon. While I'm waiting for the my tech help to advance to the right program here, take a look up here. I mean, we've got these banners. This is why we're here. Can somebody just read? It's this backwards to me. Can somebody read out really loud? Or if we were like the Occupy Wall Street, we'd all do it in unison. What's the one over there say?
Can I stop the invasion of aquatic aliens?
Great. Can I eat the fish? What? Anything else? Can I drink the water?
That those questions were first raised by some 35 years ago when he addressed on the Science Advisory Report. And his statement was, and I drink the water, and I eat the fish, and I swim in the Great Lakes. And that scared a lot of people because those three questions are the heart of why everybody is here and why we have some faith in the IJC.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, you've had a lot of information today, and this is still day one. I don't want to put you on information overload. I'm going to go through some 5 different slides here, and basically what we're doing in the next few minutes is to report on something that we were supposed to be doing all along, but has not been done real well since 1987. That is to say, the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement in 1987. In 1987, or since 1987, I think we've not really stepped up and provided an assessment, an overall assessment of the health of the lakes and an assessment of the efficacy of the programs. How are the lakes doing? How are the programs that the governments have committed to lived up to our commitments? And I'm going to say that I think it's the fault of the governments on both sides of the border, and I'm going to say it's some of the IJC falling down on the job. So, after years of back and forth saying the governments are not providing enough information, and back and forth in the comprehensive assessment not being provided, we have stepped up, and this isn't perfect. This isn't complete. But we're going to get back on track with your help, and we're going to start periodic reviews of the Great Lakes health overall. What we have here now is a work in progress. You can go to our website, you can find a copy of a draft report outside. It has 14 indicators of health of the Great Lakes. Are these the best indicators? Are they the only indicators? Do we have the picture just right? No, but it's a start, and there is valuable information in each of these indicators and in the report overall. We're asking people to respond up until November 30th to have input into this, and eventually, not eventually, but not too far thereafter, we will publish a report, and in 3 years' time, we'll publish an even better report with your help, with your input. And the next phase of the report will include a report on how well the government programs are doing in living up to their commitments. So, thank you. This, we're going to see some success, pictures of success here in these next few slides. We're going to see a few pictures of failure and some in between. So this is mostly real success. So it's PCBs and dioxin levels in herring gull eggs. And herring gulls, of course, are resident full-time in the Great Lakes. What is in the herring gull eggs reflects what's in the fish. You can find similar data by looking at sediment cores, by looking at fish. You've seen some of these data earlier today. By looking at some of the mussels. I mean, what's in the lake is in the wildlife here and in the fish. So what we see is it starts in it starts in 1987 because all these data, it really is a reflection of what's happened since 1987, our last report. And what's happened is a significant drop in PCBs and dioxins, but not a complete drop. There's a gap there. There's still contamination. Some of that is contamination because it's in the sediments, it's historic. Some of it, we need to understand this better, is long-range transport. We, in Canada and in the United States, we banned these chemicals, but worldwide they're not banned, and so we're still the recipient of some of them. But I want to make the point here on every other slide, too, that public policy makes a difference. Good public policy will lead to reductions in toxic chemicals. Bad public policy, or the lack of good